Hey, yo. Alright. Yo, what's going on? This is Shay coming back at y'all with another episode of the Emmaus Proposition. Man, I hope y'all all doing well, man. It's been a good week for me. Just came back from performing a wedding this past weekend for a friend of me and my family's. And it was a good time, man. It was cool meeting new people. Got some good contacts out of the weekend, man, and it was just a good vibe. You know what I'm saying? It was really cool. And so other than that, man, just been kicking it. I hope y'all doing good. And we're gonna get the show rolling. How about that? So, yo, today's episode, you can see by the title what we're gonna be talking about today. 80s cartoons reflect the glory of God. Yo, so I know what y'all saying. How in the world are we going to get there? Don't worry. I'll get us there. I'm your host. I'm your boy. Of course I'm going to get you there safe. But yo, before we start, let me just say, I am completely biased when it comes to my cartoons. So, me, my wife, and my mom had this conversation about who had the best cartoons. So she grew up in the in the 60s, 70s era where, you know, all the cartoons, they had all their weak joints or whatever have you. And I was telling her, like, yo, no, 80s cartoons got it on lock. Got it on lock, man. Like, we had the best cartoons. And for y'all who listening, you know what I'm saying, like, let me just take y'all back if I can. Friday lets out of school, right? You go home, you get a good night's sleep. You wake up the next morning, and you got to wake up early the next morning, right? Like, you wake up before your parents get up because, you know, you got your routine of joints that's coming on. So, you know, you grab your bowl of cereal. Maybe you got some blueberries. Maybe you got some Kicks. Maybe you got some Frosted Flakes. Some Fruity Pebbles, whatever you got, right? Some Fruit Loops, whatever it is that you got, right? You grab your bowl of cereal, you turn on the TV, and you got the TV with like the extension cord that go to the cable box, right? You ain't got this wireless technology yet, right? You can only go so far with the remote control, but you know the channel by heart. So, you know, you flip the channel on, and there's your lineup. Maybe you start with some Schoolhouse Rock, and you know, that's a throwback to some earlier joints, but I'll give this props. They did a good job breaking down complex ideas into a way that when it was presented to us as kids, we were able to latch on to what they were saying. So, you know, you had conjunction junction, you had how a bill goes before the House, eventually becomes a law. But today, I am still just a bill. You had what else did you have? You had conjunctions. You had I'm just a bill. You had like your ABCs. You had skip counting. You had all kind of stuff, right? Schoolhouse Rock was the joint, but that was the in between. That was the refreshments for the good stuff. So let me hip y'all to a couple things. Of why I think 80s cartoons were the best. I think they actually had more sophisticated form and direction than either previous or subsequent cartoon series. Let me tell you what I mean by that. You take the quintessential three of the 80s, right? You got He-Man. Come on now, give a round of applause for He-Man. You got Thundercats, right? And the derivatives of the Thundercats. So you had like Tiger Sharks and you had Silverhawks. All of them were pretty much the same as the Thundercats. It was kind of the same setup, same kind of character dynamic, but all of them were pretty much had one motif. The three of those, the three subset of those. And you had G.I. Joe, man. And, man, for anybody that tries to hate on 80s cartoons as being the best, those are the three that I would point to and say, top that. Like, you can't even get top. Not to mention all the side joints, right? Like, nobody ever talks about Mask. And no, I'm not talking about the Jim Carrey cartoon that came out in the 90s. That was just a parody, you know what I'm saying? I'm talking about Mask as an abbreviation. I think it was like Mobile Armorized Special something K. I forget what it stands for. But it was the joint, man. And oh my gosh. And Voltron. Come on, man. How can I not point out Voltron? Anyway, you had these cartoons that, so at the time of watching them, maybe this coming out, started watching them by myself. Maybe it's around 85, 84, 85, somewhere in there. So, 6, 7 years old, watching these cartoons. And, man, here's the first reason why I would say 80s cartoons were better than anything you could try to throw at it, right? They had a good message behind them. This is especially true of G.I. Joe. So, like, you would watch G.I. Joe, and all of it was like this good versus evil thing, right? Like, that was the overarching plot of all these cartoons, that good character, good morals, good values always win out over selfishness and greed and things like that. But with G.I. Joe in particular, you had this thing that they would do, like, in between the segments of the show, where they would actually teach kids like this valuable lesson. And G.I. Joe was like the brand for it. They even had like a catchphrase. Now you know, and known is half the battle. G.I. Joe, right? All my 80s kids, man, I hope y'all tune. Man, I know y'all throw your hands up when I just said that joint, right? But there was good messaging behind it. And so if you look at the cartoons previous to that, like you had the 60s, 70s era cartoons, that was like Hanna-Barbera had 60, 70 cartoons on lock. Like there wasn't much you can do in the realm of cartoons for kids. There was not much you could do without dropping the name Hanna-Barbera. And but it was all just silliness. It was all just funny games. Y'all remember like Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound? You had the cat, Top Hat Cat, or somebody like, I forget what the cat's name was, but he was pretty fly. You know what I'm saying? Like he had the little hat on, he had the little the collar and just the tie and nothing else. Yo, you had the Grape Ape. Who else you have? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. But you had all these Hanna-Barbera cartoons, right? And that was fine. It was cool. It was good for a little laugh as you were going through it. But there was no messaging behind it, man. Like it was just mindless entertainment. Yo, when He-Man came along, when Voltron and Mask and Thundercats and Tiger Sharks, Silverhawks, Voltron, when these joints came along, man, it was actually a little bit more sophisticated in how they were communicating like these deep, almost like spiritual issues, these metaphysical issues, in a way that a 7-year-old like me could grasp it. Like sitting down watching He-Man and thinking about the duality of He-Man and Skeletor. They were essentially the same person. As evidence, right? Like both of them had two sides of the sword of Eternia. And so, but they had this, obviously this good and evil division that they were wrestling between the two. And yeah, like it's a dualistic, it's dualism in its worldview, right? Like good is evenly matched with evil, and so you kind of have that back and forth that I would disagree with now, like as an adult, like looking at the nature of what evil is, who God is, how He controls all things. Like I wouldn't say that there's an equal match between good and evil, but as a 7-year-old looking at, yeah, you got the horde of evil that's controlled by Skeletor, and you got like Evil Lyn, you got like Beastman, you got the Lizard Dude, you got Mossman, and like all the cats, right? All the evil people, even to the point where like He-Man had Cringer, and then Skeletor had like the Purple Panther. And so like you just had this duality where they were essentially the same character. It was good versus evil. And there was this conflict there where like you wrestling on the inside of a human being, like, oh yeah, like everybody struggles with times of good and evil. Like everyone has this struggle. Man, it was deep, man. It was like for a 7-year-old, like I was getting into this stuff, right? Voltron was the same way, and this is another motif that I'll bring up that I think all of the cartoons had in common, of where I think either previous or subsequent cartoons didn't really explore very well, at least not to the extent that the 80s cartoons did. Teamwork is pivotal. So if you look at like Voltron, man, when the cats were in their individual forms, they would get it handed to them, man. Like there was no way some of the creatures that would get thrown at them, they never they never won. When it was just 1-on-1, the cats would just get kicked around. They get kicked in the stomach, and then they'd be in the little their little pods inside the lions, like, I'm hurt, I need help. And it wasn't until Voltron formed up, you got arms, you got legs, formed feet and body. I'll form the head. It wasn't until Voltron came together that they were actually able to defeat a common enemy. And that's what we see, like in the biblical text. Like you see how the body of Christ has to work together in order to fend off this roaring, prowling lion that we have in Satan, right? Anytime you get a Christian that tries to go lone wolf or lone lion, if you want to take it by Voltron, they just get picked off every time, man. Like these past couple years, it's been one of the loneliest times for me and my family, because I feel like in a way, because of everything that went down the way it did, like we lost a family. We lost that sense of the body of Christ in our lives, and it's been tough, man. Like even the kids are feeling it. They're just like, when are we going to be settled? And it's not until the body of Christ Voltron's up and comes together that we can defeat the enemy. The same with G.I. Joe, man. G.I. Joe was the same way. Like, and even like some of the lessons that they taught afterwards were about teamwork. Were about working together. All of them. Mask, Tiger Sharks, Thundercats, all of them needed teamwork. Matter of fact, it was one of the main lessons that all of the other Thundercats had to teach Lion-O, that he couldn't go solo. Like he had to be with his other Thundercats. Like he had to recognize, I have a particular skill set that's better than yours. Like Panthro was good at machines. Chitara was the fast, but she was the most nimble, so she had a particular skill set. Tiger, like he was good at stealth. Like he would pop up on cats. Wily Kit and Wily Cat, like they were the wild cards, right? Like they would sneak up behind people, throw people with the little with the little water balloon joints. Like they just had all the little tools and tricks and stuff they would do. But all of them, when they came together, they made Lion-O better. they were able to come to Lionel, build him up in such a way that he became the most powerful Thundercat. And it can be argued that without the leadership and mentorship from his fellow Thundercats, there would be no way. There would be no way that he would be able to wield the sword of thunder. And when he looked into it and called out the phrase, thunder, 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 Thundercats, ho! And without them coming together, like, there was times the sword wouldn't even work right when he was out of alignment with his teammates. Like, if you go back and watch the cartoon, when he was out of alignment, it would be, I don't want to say it was kind of limp, but it was kind of a limp sword. Like, the sword wouldn't work right. There's a joke in there that if I was with other people would totally come out right now. But since I'm by myself, it's not going to land as funny. Anyway, here's the third point where I think 80s cartoons are better than other generation of cartoons, right? So there was a Christ motif in those other cartoons. And here's what I mean by that. Evil would reign on the land. And really it's you could say it was like a reflection on almost like the Book of Judges, but even the Book of Judges reflects the people's need actually for complete redemption. Not like this cycle of we get in trouble, we call out for help, God sends help, we get rescued, and then we go right back into trouble. Like in the Book of Judges, just kind of circles through that pattern and gets worse and worse and worse. If you look at the motifs of some of those 80s cartoons, it had some of that motif in there. Like, the people are unable to defend themselves. They have these great creatures that come along that are too powerful for the common people to fight themselves, and they need a rescuer. And so the rescuer comes, like in the form of Voltron, would show up when like these outer space creatures would come along. They would try to fight them, realize they needed teamwork. They would Voltron up, pull out the sword, like meow, pull out the sword, slice the creature. Everybody goes home. Everybody's happy, right? Silverhawks was the same thing. Like, you had the crazy octopus dude out in space, and he had like the star on his eye, and with them it wasn't a person. Like, they didn't push a person out in front like they did with Lino. With them, it was more like military leadership. Like, you had, like, as a team, you would go and fight these battles. And so, but again, everybody had their strengths and their weaknesses. They had like the guitar dude that'd be like meh, 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 and he'd be like shooting lasers out of his guitar. You had the Copper Kid that was always the wild card. Hey yo, the Copper Kid, after every episode of the Silverhawks, he would have like space lessons and stuff, man. Like, how I learned about space was through the Silverhawks, man. Like, all the planets, they have facts on the sun and math, all kind of different stuff, right? So, Tiger Sharks was similar. Like, they just kind of needed teamwork, but it was always like this horde of evil. He-Man was the same way. Like, there was this horde of evil that would come and they would attack the people. The people didn't have a defense, and they needed that extra special help from like these people who had like this great power. And there's a verse in the Bible that talks about to whom much is given, much is required. And so they would always show up, but that was the struggle. The struggle was, now that we have these powers, how do we best show up? How do we show up in a way that has morality, that has valor, that doesn't take people for granted, but actually like protects people and lifts them up, not to the credit of themselves, but lifts people up for the sake of themselves. And I think that's kind of one of that Christ-like motif. I don't think came previously in the previous cartoons. I think a couple subsequent cartoons tried it. So you had The Last Airbender that did its best with I forget the kid's name. I think it was Aang or something like that. I think he tried. I think that cartoon tried to have like this savior character, and so Aang, being the last Airbender, was he had the best of all the different clans, but there was like a struggle against evil, and there's all this stuff going on, right? I think maybe that was like it got halfway there, but like I told y'all at the beginning, I'm completely biased. I am unashamedly an 80s kid, man. And there's this, actually that just reminded me, there's this t-shirt out there that says, everything that I needed to learn about life, I learned through watching 80s cartoons. And it's got all the writings from all the different 80s cartoons, like Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joe and all that stuff. Anyway, this motif of needing a savior, I think it's at the heart of a biblical text. So you could read the Bible in a way that is like story by story. It's a terrible way to read the Bible, and I think it's at the heart of a lot of just bad theology, a lot of heresy, is because people try to like read it just kind of like story by story without looking at the fuller context of how Christ is the complete purpose of all of those stories. And so as you have stories like Adam and Eve, the reason why we have this story of Adam and Eve is not to show how old the earth is or where people originally came from or all this weird stuff. Like it's not the point, man. The point was to introduce Christ. It was a prediction of how Christ was going to come and the work that he was going to do. So as God is handing out decrees to Adam and Eve after they fell, he's like, Adam, you're going to be forced to work the ground, and it's going to suck. Eve, your childbearing, the pain in your childbearing is going to increase, but one day a seed is going to come from you that is going to crush the serpent's head, even though he has his heel bitten. He's going to crush the serpent's head, and that's like the I think theologians call that the proto-evangelon. It's like the first time the gospel is preached that one day evil is going to be undone. One day a Christ figure is going to come that's going to rescue people from the sins that are now going to infect the entire world. The story of Abraham. The story of Abraham is not to argue about how we have these Abrahamic religions all over the world. It's like all these cousins that keep fighting each other. It's not the point, man. The point is actually about how Christ is the sacrificial lamb, that when Abraham is putting Isaac on the altar, and Isaac asks Abraham, like, where's the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says to him, God is going to provide a lamb. But as you look at the story, a lamb is not provided, a ram is. Excuse me, y'all. I had to sniff. A ram is provided, not a lamb. And so the story is left open from Genesis all the way until we get to John the Baptist's ministry, when he says, behold the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sin of the world. This whole time, like, God was like foreshadowing that this lamb was going to come. So you saw the sacrificial lamb in the book of Exodus. You saw it in like Isaiah. You saw it like throughout the history of Israel. And then when John comes on the scene, he says, I came to make the path straight so that people can clearly see what God is doing. And what God provided was the spotless lamb. That was the point of Abraham way back in the beginning. Not to mention like the promises that God through Abraham's faithfulness is going to create a family for himself, a remnant from all the families on earth, and that one day through Abraham's family the entire world is going to be blessed. And the reason that is because Christ is right there in the lineage of Abraham. And so that seed that was once again promised to Abraham, that was promised to Eve, that seed comes on the scene, and now all the families on earth are blessed through that one seed, man. As we look at 80s cartoons, it reflects that story. I think better than any of the other stories. Yes, it may have ghosts and goblins. It might have machines. And I'm not saying Jesus is ever mentioned in any of these cartoons. What I'm actually saying is there's a deeper messaging behind those cartoons that was missing out on previous and subsequent generations of cartoons. And it's cool, man. Like, it's cool to sit down and look back. Like, if you go back, yes, pretty much everything that came out of the 80s had a certain cheese to it. And as you go back and watch it, you're like, oh boy, this is cringy. This is, oh man, like the dialogue is killing me right now. And so yes, in a certain way, cartoons got better at dialogue after that. But here's where they got worse. So you could see a progression of morality from like the 50s, 60s, all the way into the 2000s, right? And you start seeing within cartoons like these negative depictions on lifestyle choices. I'll say it that way. And y'all probably going to pick up when I'm laying down. I'm not going to dance too hard around the subject, man. Like, I look at cartoons right now. So one of the main cartoons that came out of the 80s was DuckTales. Y'all remember DuckTales? Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg, right? You had DuckTales that came out, and it was bomb, man. To sit, I was a little bit older when DuckTales came out, so I wasn't like fully into it. But man, the jingle, the jingle for DuckTales is probably one of the better jingles that has come out for a cartoon, right? And probably about a year or so ago, my son got hurt, and so I had to take him to the hospital. This little joker, man, he's like, I can't say much. I would like jump off buildings and stuff like that. Like I was a jumper. Like if I could climb up on something to jump out of it, that was just my jam. Throwing rocks, jumping off stuff, climbing stuff I wasn't supposed to be climbing, doing all kind of dangerous stuff, man. Trying to cut backflips, riding bikes. You remember where like you used to stand up on the bike seat and put the other foot on the handlebar and just used to surf a bike? Man, if y'all ain't do that, man, y'all missed out. Anyway, I was a danger head. And my son, he's kind of the same way. Like he just likes to do wild stuff, and accidentally got a hold of his older sister's pocket knife and sliced his finger. Almost sliced that joint completely off. So had to take him to the ER, and we're in the ER and we're waiting to get back into a room and stuff, right? It's the middle of the night. And it's the children's section, so they got on cartoons. And they went back and they remade DuckTales. And I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like they got some old characters, they got some new characters. Like there's just, I'm okay with that sometimes as long as it's done right. And I'm sitting there watching it, and one of the characters is like, yeah, here's my two moms. And I'm like, why would you put that in a cartoon, man? And then like I step back and my kids are young, and so Arthur used to come on PBS all the time. Arthur went to they went in that direction, man, where they had Arthur and the classmates. They went to a gay wedding. You had Tots. Tots is like this cartoon where it's like a stork delivering agency. Like they deliver like baby animals and stuff like that, right? Like it's that old thing where a stork would deliver babies. And I want to say there was an episode on there, man, where they delivered to a homosexual couple, and I'm just like, holy moly, man! Like this is crazy. This is wild. This is wild stuff. And so you had these cartoons that started putting in this messaging that just wasn't, like, it's not good for the building up. Like it's promoting a lifestyle that, one, is dangerous to live, and two is just, it's against God's natural order. Like, I'm not trying to hate on nobody. I think a lot of people live life in a way that's against God's natural order, and they shouldn't. Like, there's people out there that they drink too much. They're getting high. Like they smoked out all the time. They sitting around gossiping about people, talking bad about them behind their backs. All kind of stuff, right? Like I'm not hating on like just one community, but to try to teach this stuff to children, it just doesn't belong there. And so that's one thing. It's a major thing to me, but it's just one thing. Another thing is, man, it's just okay. Here's the thing. They've tried to remake Thundercats twice now. I want to say one was back like in the early 2000s, somewhere around there. And it, like, just visually, it didn't look great. And then they did another remake later on. I want to say just a few years back. Man, it sucked, man. Like, there was none of that. And you could tell, like, there's something missing. That motif that I talked about, like that Christ motif, and the motif of like teamwork for the sake of like the building up of one another. Like that kind of stuff was missing. For the sake of just like slapping the name Thundercats on there and like tricking people into watching it. Yo, the same thing with they remade He-Man. And man, I'm not saying that Kevin Smith will ever watch my small little podcast, man, but you did He-Man dirty. You took something that was beloved by a generation of people that are now adults, right? That, like, some of us have probably moved on from watching cartoons. Yo, cartoons was such a part of my life, man. I'm not even going to front. I still rock T-shirts with some of those cartoon characters on there, man. Like, He-Man, Thundercats, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Silverhawks. Oh my goodness, man! If I could find a Silverhawk T-shirt that I like, that just had like the Silverhawk emblem on there, man, I would wear that joint out. But Kevin Smith, man, like he took something that was beloved and completely ruined it, man. Like had Tila essentially become He-Man, and it was just like, man, what are we doing, man? Like they butched her out. Like Tila was one of the first like strong cartoon characters. That was the thing, like in 80s cartoons, man. There was no sexism and stuff like that, man. Like some of the lady characters were the strongest amongst the team, but they didn't have to be like butched out, or they didn't have to like take the center stage, or they didn't have to put men down in order to raise women up. Like they were, like Tila was a beast the way she was. Like she was one of the strongest characters in He-Man. The twin sister in Silverhawks, she was one of the smartest on the team. You know what I'm saying? Like her brother was a dumb box of rocks, but like he was all big and bulky, and she was like one of the main level-headed people in the group that helped lead the team. You know what I'm saying? G.I. Joe, like Lady Jane. Lady Jane was a boss. We didn't need all of the activism that that they inject into stuff now. Like it just kind of, it took something that was beloved. It took a good messaging that anybody can be anything they want to be. Like, you can be a hero with the skill set that you have. You don't have to try to be somebody else. You don't have to be all butched out, like Diesel, to be feminine. Like, you can be powerful and still feminine. You know what I'm saying? Like, all that stuff was already there. It was already built in, man. Like, I don't think I grew up thinking that women were less than. Even in video games. Check this out. I know I'm sidebarring real quick. Y'all remember Street Fighter? The main character that people would play on there, almost everybody I knew, they wanted to play. Granted, everybody loved Ryu. Ken, I don't know why. We never really gravitated toward Ken. But the main character everybody really wanted to be was, what was her name? Chun-Li? She was kicking everybody's tail in that game. Like, I don't get where there had to be such a push for, like, quote unquote, like, this equality thing. It was already there. It already existed. And so, courtesy of 80s cartoons, man, like Hanna-Barbera didn't touch some of these subjects, man. It was the 80s cartoons that went there, man. We introduced equality right off the bat. I'm completely biased, though. But yo, no, it's good, and to an extent, the main purpose of a lot of those cartoons was, and I don't think the show's creators even knew what they were doing when they were doing this. It was to reflect the glory of God. Teamwork is to the glory of God, man. How the Bible says that we work together, and God has granted everyone, like, degrees of varying grace, but how all of those skill sets and those roles and positions and all of that work to the good of the entire body. That's what teamwork is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be like who can shine the brightest amongst everybody else. It was working together for the common good. And I learned that from watching 80s cartoons. Moral correctness. I don't know how else to say that. Just having a good moral toolkit that you can pull from. Morality is so important, man. And as I'm looking at it now, these cartoons, man, they are not even shifting away from morality. They are, like, hard turning away from, like, right morals. It's gone, man. Like, it's like, I don't obviously I don't watch a lot of cartoons because I'm an adult now, and if I do find myself watching cartoons, it's from the golden era. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you go to something that's less than? It's like being hungry for a porterhouse and going to get a cheeseburger. Like, why? I'm talking smack, and especially to, like, my mom, because we still have this argument on whose cartoons are better. It was just there was a good moral message, man. It was teaching kids, like, what's the right way to do things. Like, you can go do that stuff, but it's harmful for you. Don't do that. Like, oh my gosh, there's a lack of messaging for children that there's a right and wrong way to do things. Because people have, like, this moral relativity where they say, well, who's to say who's right and who's wrong? Nah, man. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Teach kids what's right. Don't teach them what's wrong. And I think a lot of cartoons have gone away from that. Not the 80s cartoons. The 80s cartoons were precise in showing kids like, no, those are bad guys. Here's why they're bad. Here's some bad characteristics. Don't be that guy. Like Transformers, the Decepticons, like almost everything they did was just like over the top evil, man. They were deceptive. They were did I say the Decepticons? That's what I meant to say. They were deceptive. They were underhanded. Like they didn't display teamwork. Like if you look at it, even when they came together, they didn't come together for long. There was a bunch of infighting, and when that infighting happened, the Autobots would come through and just win the day. And then they would run off, like Starscream would run off screaming, "Ah, I'm gonna get you!" But we don't teach kids morals anymore. And then the last thing is like this Christ motif. This Christ motif is probably the most important. And it's really what we do around here at the Emmaus proposition, right? We point everything to Christ, everything in all of existence, to include 80s cartoons, the golden era of cartoons. Essentially points back to Christ and who he is. And as Christ was able to lay down his life for the sake of his friends, as he covered the sins of his people, as he left his heavenly throne, as he came in to a place of humiliation. Imagine that, like the God of the universe being born into flesh, having to have somebody wipe his backside, suffering like for the sake of his people, humanity. Like he became human. And then the very people that he created and is put life into their bodies and is holding their atoms together, they put him to death. But he does it for the sake of his friends, for those that would believe in his name. He gave them a right to become children of God. And I think that motif is embedded within 80s cartoons, man. That motif of sacrifice, of dedication, of love, of grace, of forgiveness. All those things are embedded within the motif of 80 cartoons in a way that I don't think other generations of cartoons have. And so I will continue to be biased until somebody proves me wrong. But definitely, as you go back and look at it now, man, it's super cheesy. Anyway, I'm gonna end the episode there, man. It's good. It's good to think through this stuff. I had a good time just kind of thinking back through. There's so many cartoons I ain't even mentioned, man. There's so many of them out there. Like if you go back and they've got videos on YouTube where it goes through and it just plays the intro of different 80s cartoons. I got my kids reciting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like they know the joint. I got my sons walking around talking about Thundercats. Ho! There's so much good stuff out of there, man. And to the glory of God, like I'm glad that I was raised in a generation where that stuff was available, that I could look back on now and say, oh, the entire time they were actually like displaying some deeper lessons of like morality and teamwork and Christ-likeness. That's now been good for my soul to come up and say, man, those are the things that are most important in the world. So I said I was going to end it there, and I went on a little soapboxy thing. But it's good to be with y'all. I'm glad y'all coming with me on this journey, man, of just putting this material out. Thank y'all for the love. Thank y'all for the likes and the shares and the subscribes and the listens over on the podcast, man. I thoroughly enjoy y'all hitting me up saying, man, you are a nut. And I'm just like, yeah, man, to the glory of God, I'm gonna point everything to Jesus. So I had a good time. Hope y'all had a good time. I love y'all. Hope y'all doing good. And until next time, my friends, grace and peace.